Welcome back to the lineup. We're going to look at Syria, where the conflict is in no way subsiding despite international involvement and efforts to restart peace talks. Airstrikes on Aleppo today have killed at least 15 civilians and wounded scores others, with monitoring groups saying the Bayan hospital was directly hit in the rebel-held territory. It was not clear who was responsible, but government forces are seeking to regain control of the divided city.
The dead included women and children. More than 50 airstrikes hit rebel-held areas of Aleppo, some of the heaviest raids by Russian and Syrian regime aircraft in recent days. Dozens of barrel bombs were also reported to have been dropped on densely populated districts of the city by helicopter, killing at least 2 children in the Al-Marja district. According to activists and locals, another strike on the eastern Shal district is reported to have hit near the Al-Bayan hospital. The Syrian humanitarian organization Independent Doctors Association said that an airstrike had hit a children's hospital that it runs, and that one floor of it had been completely destroyed. In a speech on Tuesday, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad showed no signs of compromise in his first major address since peace talks broke down in April, saying that he would win back every inch of the country. Assad stressed that those he considers as terrorists will be defeated as long as there are countries like Iran, Russia, and China who support him. 2 days ago, Russia said that its air force will provide the, quote, most active support to Syria's government troops in order to make sure that the strategic city of Aleppo would not fall into the hands of terrorists. Moscow began airstrikes in Syria last September, saying that it wanted to help Assad defeat the Islamic State and other militant groups they consider as terrorists. At least 280,000 people have been killed, and more than half of Syria's population have fled their homes since the conflict first erupted in 2011.
And we're now joined by Vladimir van Wilgenburg, who is in Kobani, Syria. Good evening, Vladimir. What is the extent of the damage from today's airstrikes on Aleppo?
Well, I've been in northern Syria, in Kobani, and I was on the front line here, so I haven't been following the event so much in Aleppo, but I know there has been civilians killed from the latest news updates I've read so far.
Vladimir, are IS positions where you are showing any signs of weakening?
Well, today the SDF forces, led by Kurds and Arabs, are enclosing on Manbij, and I was today 1 kilometer from Manbij, ISIS-controlled city. I saw several bodies of ISIS fighters on the ground, so it seems they are cutting off their supply lines slowly and encircling the city of Manbij, which is a quite big city, actually.
And moving back to Aleppo, although you're not there, they're reporting on a hospital that was directly hit, and there have been horrible images of many bodies being pulled out from the rubble. This has almost become not a normal, but an expected reality in Syria. What are you seeing these past few weeks with the international involvement and increased airstrikes?
Well, what we've seen so far is like a complete breakdown and failure of the Geneva talks. Basically, the talks are now almost finished, and Assad has decided to resume its offensive on Aleppo to crush the Syrian rebellion or opposition there. So that's why you see also attacks and airstrikes on hospitals in which civilians are killed. Because for the Syrian government, it's not important if there are civilians or not.
Now, you mentioned Assad. He made a rare appearance yesterday speaking in front of the newly elected parliament, hardening his positions. How do you describe Assad's forces today, and have they strengthened since Russia has intervened?
Well, it's a combination of 2 factors. First of all, he's strengthened by the Russian support, because Russia has never fully withdrawn from Syria as what they have claimed. And secondly, it's not the Syrian army itself is not so strong, but they are supported by Iran with Shia militias, and they're building up militias. So even here in the city where I've been in Qamishli, there were Iranian-backed Shia militias fighting against the Kurds. So it's not something new. So it's basically the fact that both Iran and Russia are backing him, Iranians with training and ground forces, and supporting with militias from outside, and then the Russian air support, which is very detrimental for Syrian rebel groups, because we don't have air support against Assad, only against ISIS.
Vladimir van Wilgenburg, thank you very much for joining us from Kobani. To American politics now. In the long and winding road to the White House, What we've expected for months is now almost official. Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton have enough delegates to clinch the nominee for their party and will most likely be the two candidates running for president. Now, last week, Trump secured enough delegates to become the GOP candidate. Clinton did it this week on the Democratic side. But Bernie Sanders is refusing to step down. Our foreign affairs correspondent Owen Alterman has the latest.
Hillary Clinton has won. First Lady, U.S. Senator, Secretary of State, and now the presumptive Democratic nominee for president. The six contests on Tuesday gave her victory an exclamation point, especially a larger-than-expected win in California. Clinton hailed the moment as historic.
Thanks to you, we've reached a milestone. The first time in our nation's history that a woman will be a major party's nominee for president of the United States.
But Bernie Sanders was not giving up yet. He still says he can convince Democratic superdelegates to abandon Clinton and support him.
We are going to fight hard to win the primary in Washington, D.C. And then we take our fight for social, economic, racial, and environmental justice to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Donald Trump took the stage too. He said that elites have sold out the American public.
Just remember this. I'm going to be your champion. I'm going to be America's champion. Because you see, this election isn't about Republican or Democrat. It's about who runs this country, the special interests or the people, and I mean the American people.
The campaign now turns to a new phase, the general election, with two American icons facing off, Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump.
And we're now joined by Brendan Bordelin from California. Thank you for joining us this evening, your afternoon. What kind of reactions are we hearing from the California state?
Well, so California just held its primaries in both parties, the Democratic and Republican primary. Obviously, there wasn't much of a contest on the Republican side. Donald Trump, I think, got 90% of the vote. Obviously, no one's running against him. On the Democratic side, there were a lot of people that were expecting it to be closer than it was. Bernie Sanders managed to close a pretty significant poll gap in the last month or so and actually sent the Clinton team sort of scrambling. She canceled a lot of events in New Jersey to head over to California to try to salvage a victory there. And it must have worked because she actually ended up winning by nearly 13 points.
13 points. So where did this put Clinton as far as delegates?
Well, I mean, she's really had the pledged delegate lead for some time now. I think since New York a couple months ago, it looked pretty obvious she was going to be the nominee. But as of last night, she's got the outright majority of pledged delegates. When you combine that with the superdelegates that she earned over a year ago, she has actually officially clinched the Democratic nomination. Still, though, Sanders last night said he's going to fight on. He's going to take it to the Washington.
He's going to fight on. At what point can we expect, perhaps, for him to endorse Hillary as she is the likely nominee?
That's the big question. Nobody really knows. He's going to fight on in Washington. He says he's going to take it to the convention in July in Philadelphia. If that's the case, the Democratic Party might really have a unity fight on its hands, and it'll be interesting to see what happens in November and if those Sanders supporters come to Clinton and come into the fold against Trump come the fall.
Absolutely. What's Clinton's strategy going ahead?
I think she needs to sort of tiptoe around Sanders supporters, not really express frustration. You know, she has to give them time to come to her and say, listen, I know that we have our disagreements, but you have to look at this guy on the other side, Donald Trump. You know, she's going to paint him with every brush in the book, misogynist, racist, obviously bad for working people. And I think if she gives the Sanders people time, you know, a lot of paid delegates that support Sanders that I've talked to have said they are open and ready to support her, especially when she's running against Donald Trump. So I think she just needs to give him some space.
And Hillary was very quick to appeal to the Sanders voters, saying he had an incredible campaign. Can we expect them to automatically unite against Trump?
I don't think you can expect that. I think there are a lot of Sanders voters who are very upset with the system, right? Whether it's the Republican side or the Democratic side. They see Clinton as part of the system. They may not see Trump as part of the system. And so I think Trump does have an opening with some of these voters. I think Sanders is going to have a real role to play here if the Senator Sanders himself can actually get out there and tell his supporters full-heartedly, full-throatedly, back Hillary Clinton, get behind her. That might have an effect. But I do think the Democratic Party is in for some real struggles in the next month and a half to try to unite this party after a very divisive primary.
Brendan Bordelin, thank you very much for joining us from California. And we're now in studio with our foreign affairs correspondent, Owen Alterman. Owen, Hillary Clinton seems unstoppable at this point.
She is. She's the presumptive Democratic nominee. Bernie Sanders might not be saying it yet, but he will be. Now she's turning to the general election. She actually started to do that over the past few weeks and months, taking on Donald Trump and trying to exploit the gender gap into her favor and to try to reach out to other groups that might be alienated by Trump. And also, of course, as you mentioned, to reach out to Bernie Sanders supporters.
So why is Sanders still running, refusing to back down?
It's a great question. We've talked yesterday about how absurd Bernie Sanders' argument is. But Bernie Sanders is not a fool. Bernie Sanders knows what he's doing, what might be going through his head. First of all, we should say Bernie Sanders could drop out tomorrow. It's happened before. John Kasich gave a speech like this. The next day, dropped out of the race. So we don't know what he's going to do. If he stays in for the next few weeks, why might he do it? Number one, his supporters want to see him fight. They want to see him fight. We've seen them in the clips. They know he might not win, but they want to see him give it a fight. Number two, and related to that, Bernie Sanders staying in the race keeps him in the frame, keeps him in the discussion, and helps him build his movement for the long term if he wants to do that. And number three, a wild card. What if Hillary Clinton is actually indicted because of the email scandal?
Which is a big question that continues to haunt her. Could the email scandal still... it still does arise, but could this really hurt her chances in the presidency?
It's a big wild card, Michal. It's a big wild card. The investigation is still underway by the FBI. If it breaks and if it moves toward an indictment, and especially if that happens before the Democratic convention, it could really shuffle the deck. And it could bring Bernie Sanders in. And if it happens after the Democratic convention, after she's already had the nomination, then it's even more of a wild card in the general election. We'll have to see. We don't know what's happening. We do know it's a serious investigation, but we don't know where it's going to go, and we don't know when.
And you did mention Bernie Sanders' claim, calling it outrageous. He still believes he could sway the superdelegates.
He thinks so, but it is outrageous. It's ridiculous. On the one hand, Bernie Sanders has railed against superdelegates for months, saying that they're undemocratic. Now, what is he saying? Superdelegates, please be undemocratic. Please go against the will of the voters. Please do exactly the opposite of what Democratic voters have wanted to do, which is choose Hillary Clinton as the nominee. It doesn't make much sense, which again, Michal, brings us to the question, what is Bernie thinking? He's not a fool. He must not believe the argument himself, but he must have a reason for doing it anyway.
And him staying in the race, will this hurt Hillary Clinton and her vote in the presidential election the longer he stays in?
Well, it's hurting her for now. It's hurting her for now, and we see it in polling that Bernie Sanders supporters are less likely to support Hillary Clinton than we might think they would be. We also saw it in last night's speeches, Donald Trump making a direct appeal to Bernie Sanders voters to try to bring them over to his side. But again, there are people who say the longer he stays in the race, the more he criticizes Hillary, the more it will hurt her in November. I'm skeptical. I think the minute he comes around to endorse her, and on a related note, the minute President Obama comes in to endorse Hillary Clinton, which is expected to happen in the coming days, then I think that will help Hillary.
Which he's done informally in many ways.
He has. He's given some subtle or not so subtle hints to Bernie Sanders to please get out of the race. But he hasn't actually done the formal step of endorsing. He wanted to stay on the sidelines until Hillary Clinton became the presumptive nominee. That's now behind us, and I think we'll see Barack Obama come off the sidelines.
Owen Alterman, thanks. As always, we're going to go back to our breaking news story of the hour of this evening. In fact, we received reports from London saying police carried out an explosion, a controlled explosion right outside the Israeli embassy in London. And for more information, we're now joined by Jonathan Sachadati, our European correspondent. What details do we have at this point?
So far, the details are scarce, but we do know that Scotland Yard officers have carried out a controlled explosion on what they're calling a suspicious car parked outside the Israeli embassy in central London. Now, that caused some chaos with commuters who were in the area in South Kensington. And also this property where the embassy is based is very, very close to the home of the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge's London residence, Kensington Palace. It's not yet known if the royal couple and their babies were in the home at the time, but also the nearby food market, the Whole Foods supermarket, was evacuated, and police have been refusing to let people back onto Kensington High Street at this busy commuter time. So the controlled explosion presumably taking place of this car that was spotted and reported at quite a high traffic moment when people are making their way home from work.
Absolutely. Now, Jonathan, London has been on high alert. For people who don't know, this is a relatively closed-off street. Although it is in central London, there are many embassies in this area and a lot of security presence. How do you explain such a rare, or not a rare, such a strange event taking place right outside such a highly secured area?
Of course, it is indeed quite a highly secured area, being the Israeli embassy, but also, as you say, the street itself is a very exclusive road with certain other embassies and very, very expensive homes in it, which means that at either end it actually is gated and has security with a small hut there in order to check traffic going in and out. So getting any explosive near the embassy itself would be an enormous breach of that security. And then, of course, it being the Israeli embassy, it's surrounded by very thick bollards, concrete barriers, and police, armed police as well. So to have even managed to break that security, if indeed they have, and this suspicious car was indeed laden with some sort of explosive, would be a failing in security. In the meantime, it's not known exactly what the consequences have been of the controlled explosion if it was found that the car did contain some sort of bomb. But that road will now be closed off, as well as certain parts of the high street. And this is something we're waiting for more information on about the police activity that's been going on there. But people will be presumably in some sort of safety, those who were inside the embassy, as this was a controlled explosion and it was carried out by the police, meaning there must have been at least some prior information and warning that meant that were it an actual bomb, it didn't go off as planned.
Absolutely, and probably following intelligence information that was received. Jonathan Satradati, thank you for joining us, and of course we will update our viewers as more information becomes available about this explosion in central London. And we're going to move now to some financial news. The World Bank downgraded its global growth forecast after the first quarter, since markets were seeing a slow start to the year. I-24 News wraps it up.
The World Bank slashed its global growth forecast to just 2.5%, down from the 2.9% it projected as late as January. The downward revision was caused by weak trade, diminishing capital flows, and low commodity prices. And the slump in resource prices caused a widening gap between emerging and developed economies.
Commodity exporting emerging market and developing economies have struggled to adapt to lower prices for oil and other key commodities. Growth in these economies is projected to advance at a meager 0.4% pace this year, whereas growth in commodity importers has been more resilient.
Commodity exporting emerging countries are struggling to adapt the lower prices for oil and other natural resources, accounting for half of the World Bank's downward revision. Meanwhile, net commodity importing economies are seeing a boost to GDP growth from the low prices.
As advanced economies struggle to gain traction, most economies in South and East Asia are growing solidly, as are commodity importing emerging economies around the world.
The downgrade isn't the first 2016 has seen. The World Bank's forecast followed a similar IMF report from just 2 months ago that showed global growth at a modest 3.2%.
And we're going to stay on the topic of economy. Over the past half-decade, the relationship between China and Israel, particularly on the investment front, has been blossoming. Israel's booming high-tech sector and China's shift from manufacturing to service and investments are proving to be an impressive match. I-24 News' Shelby Weiner reports on the growing symbiotic relationship between the world's second largest economy and the startup nation. Let's take a look.
A new company is looking to change the game on how Chinese investors connect with Israeli startups. Vadi Ventures, the first wholly Chinese-owned company established in Israel, is working to make collaborations between the countries more efficient.
We see more and more Chinese come to Israel, and they find an interesting opportunity to do investment, but they are lacking of the channel. Between China and Israel is still a trust problem. The both parties do not really trust each other, actually. You see a lot of people coming here, but they are reluctant to make decisions.
The story of many Chinese-Israeli partnerships begins as quickly as it ends. Investors come to the startup nation seeking innovation. But language barriers and a lack of understanding of Israeli regulations make many Eastern companies wary of business and more likely to shy away from potentially high-risk investment. Bodi's two-day conference set out to tackle these issues because Chinese funds are searching for opportunity in the land of milk and honey.
We want to find new startups to recommend to Chinese companies. We are being helped by a Chinese investment company that has been here a long time to help us find promising projects. I see future collaborations as having good opportunities.
Middleman parties are becoming the norm in bridging Eastern business. The past 2 years have seen a major increase of Chinese-Israeli deals, a trend that will continue as China evolves from its low-cost manufacturing economy to a more Israel-style, innovation-focused model.
Urgent discussions were underway today, according to British Prime Minister David Cameron, who's calling on voters to register as soon as possible in order to be eligible to vote on the upcoming referendum, where Britons will decide whether the UK stays or leaves the European Union. The British Premier extended the registration for voters until Thursday midnight after the system crashed last night on the scheduled deadline. Today marks the third day of Ramadan, the Muslim holy month, where worshippers fast from sunrise to sunset. Now, other than the nightly feast, television series have proven to be a popular aspect of traditional celebrations. This next report offers a glimpse. And this next report is not coming, so luckily we're joined in studio by Reneen Bulus, our religious affairs correspondent. Ramadan Kareem.
Am I? Oh, okay, for today only.
For today.
For today.
So do tell us, what can you tell us about these TV series, which usually don't come hand in hand with Ramadan, but apparently they do?
First of all, every year we get these amazing productions of Ramadan series, TV shows, and what makes this year really, really different from other past years is the reality of the Middle East, the reality in Syria and Iraq and Lebanon and Egypt, and you can really see it very clear in these shows. If you will concentrate, for example, on Syria, Syria is the Syrian drama is number one, is known as the top drama in the world. All the Arab world watches the Syrian drama. And in 2000, and if we can say before all the crisis in Syria started, they used to...
Before the Syrian conflict, so more than 5 years ago?
More than 5, yeah, in 2011, at the end of 2000... They had between 50 to 60 TV shows. Today, and after 2011...
So these TV shows, I just want to understand, because we weren't unfortunately able to see the report, TV shows which are popular and perhaps created specifically for the month of Ramadan.
Yeah, they're created specifically for the month of Ramadan. This is also why every year you see, let's call it a different theme.
Okay, so what are this year's themes?
This year, unfortunately, is terror.
It's terror, a little too realistic.
Yes,
a little too realistic for us.
We will talk about Bab al-Hara. Bab al-Hara, it means Bab is gate, al-Hara is neighborhood, the gate of the neighborhood. It's a Syrian, a very famous Syrian Ramadan show. It's been broadcast, is now the 8th season, and the whole period of this show is from the French. It's from the French mandate in Syria
and reflecting reality.
And reflecting reality
today.
Yes.
So just take us into someone's own living room. Ramadan month. You break the fast after sunset, and then you watch some television.
Yes, and it's not...
Now, the news is showing covering the conflict, and then these TV series are also covering the conflict.
In a nicer way, I guess.
In a nicer way. So if you can explain or describe to us, how are these themes coming through in Ramadan?
If we'll take Bab al-Hara as an example, okay, you can see them facing suddenly terrorists, or there is the son of the hero of the neighborhood married a Jewish girl, for example, and there was a big fuss and a big fights about it, but in the end they accepted her and she became a very active woman in the neighborhood. In Bab al-Hara also, it's very important to mention that in past years you didn't really see the strong women existence. The women used to get the role of the weak woman that sits at home. This Ramadan,
unfortunately, that is all the time, so we'll have to send our viewers to watch these series themselves, which Muslim viewers and non-Muslim viewers can watch
all
it,
the
but
Arab world, actually.
We will say Ramadan Kareem, a happy Ramadan to our Muslim viewers. This is all for today from the lineup. Next up is News Now with Marav Savir. Stay tuned. Vladimir, are IS positions where you are showing any signs of weakening?
Well, today the SDF forces led by Kurds and Arabs are enclosing on Manbij, and I was today 1 kilometer from Manbij, ISIS-controlled city. I saw several bodies of ISIS fighters on the ground, so it seems they are cutting off their supply lines slowly and encircling the city of Manbij, which is a quite big city, actually.
And moving back to Aleppo, although you're not there, they're reporting on a hospital that was directly hit, and there have been horrible images of many.
A children's hospital that it runs, and that one floor of it had been completely destroyed. In a speech on Tuesday, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad showed no signs of compromise in his first major address since peace talks broke down in April, saying that he would win back every inch of the country. Assad stressed that those he considers as terrorists will be defeated as long as there are countries like Iran, Russia, and China who support him. 2 days ago, Russia said that its Air Force will provide the, quote, most active support to Syria's government troops in order to make sure that the strategic city of Aleppo would not fall into the hands of terrorists. Moscow began airstrikes in Syria last September, saying that it wanted to help Assad defeat the Islamic State and other militant groups they consider as terrorists. At least 280,000 people have been killed, and more than half of Syria's population have fled their homes since the conflict first erupted in 2011.
And we're now joined by Vladimir van Wilgenburg, who is in Kobani, Syria. Good evening, Vladimir. What is the extent of the damage from today's airstrikes on Aleppo?
Well, I've been in northern Syria, in Kobani, and I was on the front line here, so I haven't been following the event so much in Aleppo, but I know there has been civilians killed from the latest news updates I've read so far.
Welcome back to the lineup. We're going to look at Syria, where the conflict is in no way subsiding despite international involvement and efforts to restart peace talks. Airstrikes on Aleppo today have killed at least 15 civilians and wounded scores others, with monitoring groups saying the Bayan hospital was directly hit in the rebel-held territory. It was not clear who was responsible, but government forces are seeking to regain control of the divided city.
The dead included women and children. More than 50 airstrikes hit rebel-held areas of Aleppo, some of the heaviest raids by Russian and Syrian regime aircraft in recent days. Dozens of barrel bombs were also reported to have been dropped on densely populated districts of the city by helicopter, killing at least 2 children in the Al-Marja district. According to activists and locals, another strike on the eastern Shal district is reported to have hit near the Al-Bayan hospital. The Syrian humanitarian organization Independent Doctors Association said that an airstrike had hit